Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Virtuous Jedi. Today we're going to be looking at email list management in Virtuous. So how do we get people and contacts into our email lists, and how do we keep those lists up to date so that we don't have to do a lot of manual work to keep those lists nice and clean? So there are two different ways that we might want to do list management. One would be the more common for things like general communications and newsletters, where we probably want to enroll most of the people in our database into the list if they've got an email address, right? They've given a gift, they've interacted with us. We want to send them our regular messaging. So in that case, we're going to continue to send to those individuals until they decide to opt out at some point, and they can unsubscribe. They might contact our organization and say, please remove me from your list. And at that point, we would manually remove them, or they would remove themselves. The other way is for lists that maybe there's a very specific reason someone might be in that list. A great example is a recurring donor. So you've got recurring donors. They start making a recurring gift. Maybe you have a special recurring donor program at your organization. You want to send those people maybe special messaging, really talking about the way that their gift has impacted your organization. And you're probably not going to send them your general appeals. Or if you do, you're going to tailor that communication, understanding that they're a monthly supporter or a recurring supporter, and maybe need to be communicated with just a little bit differently just because of the nature of their giving to your organization. But if a recurring donor decides to stop giving at the recurring level, we want to remove them automatically from that list so that they don't continue to receive the wrong type of communication. So in that case, it is completely up to us to enroll them in that list, and then it's up to us again to remove them. Obviously, for any email marketing that we do, there's going to be that unsubscribe link at the bottom, and people are going to be able to opt out. But overall, we want to make sure that in this case, we're the ones that are in control of who is in or not in that list at any given time based on their actual giving. So I'm just going to jump over into the email tool here. So if we're looking at our lists, this is probably what you'll see when you first get Virtuous, unless you've imported from another system. But you're going to see a general communication that's kind of the default. Anybody that's on our email list is going to get these type of emails. And then we might have some other ones like that monthly supporter list that I just talked about. So let's go ahead and create that. And I just want to point out a couple of things here. We'll call this recurring supporters. Okay, so in this case, I don't want to make this a default type, because if I do that, the donor is going to actually see this if they try to opt out of the mailings. And I don't really want them to be able to opt out at this level or to see the reason that they're in this specific list. You might have, a major donor email list or things like that. You don't really want the donor to see that. That's more internal that they're in that list. So we're going to not make this a default type. And I'm just going to put in the description, anyone with a recurring gift. If this is going to be a default type, I would want this description to be something more donor facing, and making it a default type makes it available on the unsubscribe page for people to have the ability to read why they're in the list, what the list does, and then opt in or out of those individual lists. So I'm going to save this. And now we need some queries. So what we're going to do is use the automation tool to create two different automations. One is going to enroll everybody in our general communication list who should be, and then one is going to enroll the individuals in our recurring supporter list if they're a recurring supporter, and then it's going to remove them if they're not. So we'll see two different types of automations here. So in my query tool, I'm going to go ahead and create a new query here, and I'm going to choose a individual query. So in Virtuous, when you're dealing with contact information, you're going to be using either a contact query or an individual query most of the time. Contact is going to be the entire household, organization, foundation. It's going to kind of bring in that whole entire record, whereas an individual will let you tailor down to very specific people on the record. So a household can have more than one individual. Each individual can opt in or opt out of a mailing list. So that's why we want to do emails at the individual level here. So I'm going to name this. I'm going to call this automation general communications email list. And I just like to put automation in the front of my query titles if it is used in an automation. And that just lets team members know, this is for a very specific purpose. Don't edit it, don't modify it, don't delete it. It does get locked in the query when it's being run, but sometimes you have your queries or your automations paused and you just don't want anything to happen to those queries. Okay, so here I'm going to say pull in everybody who has an email. And if that's my only parameter, that's great. Some people will have custom fields that they'll use to mark someone as opted in or opted out. Some people will use a tag, which is not ideal. The tag applies to the entire contact record, not just the individual. But maybe that's how you want to do it. If one person in the household says, I don't want to receive your communication, maybe you do opt out the entire household. So let's see, I think there's a default tag in here for do not email. Yep, there we go, no email. So maybe your general communications looks like this. It's going to pull in everybody who has an email address on file and that has not been opted out through some type of custom field or some type of tag to identify that they should not be receiving emails at the general level. We don't need to worry about the subscribed or unsubscribed because Virtuous is going to respect that automatically. So if we send to the general communication list and that person unsubscribes from the list, then the next time we send, even if that person is still, meeting this parameter, has email, does not have the tag, they're actually not going to receive any of those emails again because Virtuous is going to check before it sends to make sure they're not unsubscribed. So that's it. We've got our automation for our general communications email list. So let's go over to our automation tool. And we're going to create a new automation workflow and we're going to target individuals. So we're going to call this email list general communications. And we're going to allow re-enrollment and we're going to run this all the time against all contacts. So we chose individual because we use an individual query. We want to make sure this is running at the individual level. And then it's, for whatever reason, someone may have an email address and then they get that email address removed because it was a bad one. We couldn't send to it. And then we put a new one on later. We don't want them to be excluded from being added to the list with their new email address. So that's what that allow re-enrollment is going to do. So this is going to be a very, very simple automation. We're just going to have one step. It's going to be email, or let's call this general email list. We're going to use a saved query, which was our automation general communications email list. We'll go ahead and save that. So one thing that I have noticed is that when you link a query in an automation, Virtuous actually duplicates your query and renames it with whatever the name of the step was. So you'll see it was automation general email communications. Now it's just general email list query. So I always just go back in and edit and I just choose that query again, just to make sure that it's linked to the one that I built initially, that it's got the right naming. And that way I know I have the right query when I'm making edits. We're going to add one action here, and that is going to be email list. And we're going to add general communication. That's it. So what this is going to do if we turn this on by going to actions run workflow is every night at midnight, Virtuous is going to scan your entire database for everybody who is an individual with an email address and does not have the tag no email. Obviously, you can make that query more complicated if you needed to for your organization. Maybe you want to exclude foundations. Maybe you want to, exclude major donors or other things like that. So you can always go back and click on that link and edit the query. So if I wanted to exclude foundations, for example, I could say contact type is not foundation. Once I turn the automation on, this query will get locked down. So if I want to make changes to the query, I'll have to come to actions and there will be a pause workflow option here. So that's the general communications. That's the easier setup here. The other setup is not hard at all. It's just one extra step. So let's go ahead and walk through that as well. So for this one, my example is recurring donors. So I'm going to do a couple things here. First of all, I need to find a way to identify all of my recurring donors. So I can do that through a recurring gift query. What this will do is we'll be able to check the recurring commitments in Virtuous and see if someone has an active commitment, and therefore we can assume that they're a recurring donor. So let's go ahead and name this automation active recurring gifts. And then we're going to go ahead and add 2 lines here. So we'll say status is not canceled. So don't show me any commitments that are canceled. And status is not fulfilled. You'll notice that the other 2 options here are past due and up to date. I consider both of those to be an active recurring gift. Someone could be past due for a valid reason. Maybe their credit card expired, whatever the reason may be. If it is not up to date, but it is past due, it's not been canceled, we're still going to consider them an active recurring donor, and you're going to look at your past due recurring gifts and then cancel them if necessary. So this is all my active recurring gifts. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my query tool, and I'm going to build another individual query, and this will be my automation recurring supporter email list. Same thing, we're going to say has email is true. Tag is none of do not email. And then our last step here is to nest that recurring commitment query back into this so that we can reference all of the people that are in that query. So we're going to say, show me all the contacts that are in our active recurring gifts query. There we go. So now we have a individual query that's referencing a different type of data in our database, which was the recurring gift commitments. The recurring commitments live at the contact level, so that's how we were able to find all of the contacts that were in that automation. And then if there is more than one individual on that contact record that's associated with that gift, they're going to get pulled into here as well. So now we'll go back to our automation tool, click on workflows here. All right, we're going to create a new workflow, change it to individual as our target, call this email list recurring supporters. And again, we'll allow re-enrollment because as recurring donors cancel gifts maybe throughout the year, maybe next year they set up a new recurring gift. We want to make sure that this is always running against all contacts, and there is the possibility that someone could be in it one day, not in it the next day, and then in it the next, right? So we're going to allow re-enrollment there. And then this one will have 2 steps. So let's build step 1, which will be email list enrollment. We'll use our saved query for our recurring supporter email list. I'm just going to go back in and edit that so it pulls the right query. Okay, and then same action, we'll go to email list, and then we're going to add the recurring supporter list. Simple enough. Okay, so let's add step 2. So this will be remove from email list. And this one I'm actually going to use a filter. So you notice I did not build a whole separate query for this. I can actually reference the same queries that I already built. So if they're in step 1, we don't want them in step 2. If they're in step 2, we don't want them in step 1. So we can use just inverted logic there to make sure that, you know, we exclude anyone who's in step 1, essentially. So we're going to say, show me all the contacts that are not in the recurring query, the active recurring query that we built, which was this automation active recurring gifts. So remember, in our automation recurring supporter email list query, we said, show me all the contacts that are in the active recurring gift query. So in this step, we're just going to say, and then show me everyone who's not. So that'll pull in our entire database into this one automation. All recurring donors will be in step 1. All non-recurring donors will be in step 2. So then we'll add an action here, email list. We'll select remove and recurring supporters. That's it. So now as this runs, we're going to keep an up-to-date email list that is always including our real active recurring supporters. And then once those people cancel their gift or for whatever reason are no longer an active recurring supporter, they actually fall out of the email list, and that keeps it up to date. Every night at midnight, automation is going to do a bunch of work for us and make sure that our email lists are up to date. So you can see how this could be applied across all of your email lists, right? So you probably have other programs or things that people might sign up for. So anytime that you have a email list that a donor or supporter is going to self-select to opt into, sign up for our newsletter on our website, fill out this form, you're going to get our newsletter. We're going to use option 1, right? Which was the first query that we built. All we're going to do is if this thing happens over here, put this contact in this email list until they determine that they want to opt out. Easy enough. And then anytime that we have lists that we're curating internally, lists that we want to make sure that are kept up to date for our purposes, like our recurring supporters, we're going to use option 2 here. The only real difference is that we're going to determine when someone is unenrolled from that list as well. So that's how automation can really be powerful for creating those email lists for you. Obviously, if you want to segment down further, you want to send to your general communication list, but you want to send a version to your major donors and a version to your non-donors, that's where those queries can come in, and you can still send to a query through the email distribution. But when you're just sending to the entire list and keeping it really simple, this is going to save a lot of time and hassle. You build the parameters once. This is what it takes for someone to get this type of email communication. Automation takes care of the rest. All right, hopefully that is helpful to you. Let me know in the comments how you are using automation for email list enrollment. If you have any questions, would love to hear them. And until next time, may the fundraising force be with you.